adventure number 29 on the Adventures in Brain Injury podcast series. My name is Michelle Malmberg, and I am here once again with the co-host and founder of Adventures in Brain Injury, Kevin Ballister. How are you, Kevin?
I am fantastic. How are you
Excellent.
doing, Michelle?
I am very well. And before we get all touchy-feely and lovey-dovey, I am going to roll into some of the reasons why we are here. So not only was your brainchild the Adventures in Brain Injury work, but you have since gone on to create a new website, feedabrain.com, and to write a book forthcoming this October titled How to Feed a Brain, Nutrition for Optimal Brain Function and Repair. So I think you're getting a little bit excited about this forthcoming launch.
I am indeed, but you are totally putting me on the hot seat. We're not doing it until November.
Oh,
so
well,
October sounds fantastic because then my Libra would be a Libra. Right? I'm on the Libra. It's my birthday in just a little bit, but my book's birthday is going to be next month. My book's going to be a Scorpio.
Oh, well, there we go. Hey, Scorpios are great. They pair well with Libras.
So I'm told.
Well, and so there are a few people excited about what is forthcoming in November. And one of the supporters of your book is Dr. David Haase. He's a functional medicine practitioner, and I enjoy reading his comments on our functional medicine forum. And I wanted to read the comment he left about your book on your website. So if I may, I'm going to go straight ahead.
I'll allow it. Okay.
Ideas are nothing without action. And in Feed a Brain, Kevin shares his journey of brain healing in bite-sized action steps that are friendly to those with brain injury, brain fog, or brain degeneration. From tube feedings to tubers, he makes what is often a dry topic accessible for professionals and patients alike. From the first time I met Kevin many years ago, when he was relatively fresh off of the acute phase of his head injury, I was impressed with his tenacity to learn what he needed to know to get his brain back. I have had the honor to treat thousands of brain-challenged patients, and I have learned there is no information so powerful as that which comes from somebody in your own shoes. I warmly recommend Feed a Brain to you. Well done, Kevin.
Dr. Haase is phenomenal. And
yes.
as you were reading that, I'm like, why hasn't he been on the podcast? He needs to be on the podcast. Yeah, so we're going to need to reach out to him and see if we can make that happen.
Well, and he's an author himself. Curiosity Fuels the Human. I mean,
How
title.
Good.
Oh, that's a great title. So that clearly there is something more there.
Yep, and we often talk about the arrogance in medicine, and
it's lacking. In this case, it's lacking.
In what, David Haase?
Yes.
There's that's I don't know if lacking's the right term, because lacking implies that it should be there. Like
okay, all right.
I love everything about this guy. He's fantastic. So curiosity heals the human. And when we're talking about the arrogance of medicine, that like arrogance is a place not of curiosity. It's being sure that you know everything, right?
Yes.
So as I often say, I respect those who know that they don't know everything, and know that anybody who thinks they do doesn't even know enough to know they don't know it all. Say that 10 times fast.
I was thinking that exact comment. Yes. It's well put, yes. And you have rehearsed that very well, so you've said it more than once. And we still receive it well. It's so true. So true.
Well,
And they're game changers like Dr. Hasse and our guest today, Dr. Daniel Engle. They are shaking things up.
absolutely.
We are going to have better patient care and just a better commitment from medicine to healing because of the work they are doing. So I'm really excited about today's guest, today's podcast.
As am I. Before we do that, I want to let everyone know that this episode is brought to you by Revive Treatment Centers of America, located in Denver, Colorado. And I can't say enough about how beautiful their integrative team of doctors, nurses, and scientists and neuropathologists. Like, they have a great team, and the work they do is second to none. So thank you guys so much. We also are looking for sponsors, either right now, right here, right now,
in the pre-roll,
in the pre-roll
category,
or after the podcast, after the interview, which would be the post-roll.
That's right, yes.
So if you're interested, head over to feedabrain.com/sponsor to apply to be a sponsor.
Fabulous. Fabulous. And if you would like to contribute in a more modest way on patreon.com/AIBI, you can help to cover some of our production costs. Many volunteer hours go into each podcast. However, we do have some hard costs that need to be covered. So your tip in the jar would mean a lot.
The proverbial digital website tip jar. Love it.
It's true. It's makes the world go round, makes the podcasts available. So yes. What else is up, Kevin?
I think what's up is we are going to talk to an MD, much like Dr. David Hasse, who is working to change, to, as you said, shake things up and completely reform and improve the standard model of care, especially when it comes to the brain. So
yes, go on.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm just super excited to get into it, but you go ahead.
Oh, the standard of care, but also the way medicine is considered. I mean, I think Dr. Daniel Engle has an amazing approach to healing. And that is so uncharacteristic of the current medical model. It's revolutionary. It is a game changer. It is a life-changing thought process and approach to healing. So I'm really excited to share this today.
Talk about curiosity.
Yes.
I think David Hasse and Daniel Engle would have a great time together. I should introduce them.
I was just going to say that. I think you need to make a match there.
So, all right, let's get into it.
Let's go.
All right.
Yes.
Well, tell us about our guest today.
He is a board-certified doctor in psychiatry and neurology. It's got to be my favorite combination. With a clinical practice that combines aspects of regenerative medicine, orthomolecular psychiatry, integrative spirituality, and peak performance methods. Now that is a home run. He received his medical degree from the University of Texas in San Antonio. Great place to have to study. Did his psychiatric residency, a degree from the University of Colorado in Denver, and his child and adolescent psychiatry, my tongue, fellowship degree from Oregon Health and Sciences University. So this is one very well-educated man, lots of experience, lots of learning. So currently he is the medical consultant to Onnit Labs in Austin, Texas, the Temple of the Way of Light Ayahuasca Center in Peru, and the True Rest Float Center in Tempe, Arizona. Sounds good to me. His programs include Freedom from Meds, a comprehensive and integrative toolkit for successful transition from psychiatric medications. He also has the Concussion Repair Manual, facilitating the return to optimal function after concussion and traumatic brain injury. And because he just can't stop at that, we have full spectrum medicine, which utilizes the most effective, broad-based, synergistic avenues in leading-edge frontier medical research for accelerating personal development toward optimal life performance. So sign me up. I'm in.
There is so much synergy, Dr. Engle. I mean, even in our locations, we have Texas and Colorado, and yeah, no, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here.
Welcome.
It's good to be with you both. Thanks for inviting me on.
Absolutely, yeah, and the Concussion Repair Manual. After reading the Concussion Repair Manual, soon after writing my book, the connections in my brain were just firing all over the place. Like, yeah, this is kind of a match made in heaven. This is really amazing. So thank you for writing that, and we'll talk more about that as we go on today.
Lots of synergy for sure.
Yes. And the depth, really, Kevin, we haven't had a guest like Dr. Engle who has so much breadth and depth with regard to getting out of the crisis into healing, into optimal function, and then going beyond optimal function. So I'm pretty excited about that. However, since our guest has his own personal story, I'd like to ask about it, if I may. Dr. Engle, I read a little bit from the first chapter of your book, and one of your comments was, "My own cosmic egg was cracked very wide open when I was 21, and that grabbed my attention." So I'd love you to share that with our listeners, please.
Yes, certainly. So I went to, I guess it predates that opportunity, just a few years. In high school and college, I was super intense, very type A, the prototypical gunner that we would describe in medical school. 4.0 across the board, captain of the team, everything was perfect, no room for second place, that kind of like level of intensity. Yes. And I matched for medical school with the idea of going into either surgery or emergency medical care.
Okay.
I like that level of triage, that fix-it kind of mentality. You're in, you're out. At the end of the procedure, if it was a success or not. It was that kind of like very young, directed focus. And then 2 weeks before medical school, I dove off a pier, hit a sandbar, and broke my neck.
Oh gosh.
And so that was one of the big re-trajectorizing experiences that I had. And it really turned me onto a different path in medicine. I was given the option of going into medical school in the halo straight away, or I could sit out a year. And I decided to go ahead and start. And in the experience of starting medical school while in the halo, it finally slowed me down enough to reflect on how I was living my life, and if I really was desiring to stay at that level of intensity, or if now there was something that was piquing my interest that I hadn't really been paying attention to. And essentially that was my own personal development and more of a humanistic connection with the relationships that I had, as opposed to seeing people as a means to an end. I was more directed and oriented towards just connecting with people in general and seeing how each of us is, yes, unique and individual, but how we're also in this collective experience together as a family of humanity. So it really helped me to get into the field that I would eventually become oriented towards, which is psychiatry and neurology. I got curious about.
Can I back you up real quick?
Mm-hmm.
Can you describe what a halo is for our listeners?
Yeah, halo. So when you break your neck, well, this is 20 years ago, and it's not too different now. when you break your neck, usually there's an unstable fracture somewhere along the vertebral column. And in the case of the neck, it's the cervical spine. And if that fracture is unstable, then it can sever the cord. And most people that have a C5 fracture the way that I broke, 95+% of people have some kind of neurologic impairment, quadriplegic, some kind of neurasthenia, pain syndromes, difficulty with function, all the way up to problems breathing. Mm-hmm. Luckily, I happen to have a wide spinal canal, so there was more room for the cord to move. And I was also about 20 pounds heavier because I just came off of college off-season playing soccer. So I had about a 17-inch neck. I had a lot of cushion, a lot of ability to absorb. And funny enough, too, the amount of strength and, you could say size, but more like tensile strength and stability in the cervical neck or in the cervical soft tissue, the more people have that level of stability, the more they're protected against both concussion and against breaking vertebra. So I had some cushion, and with also a larger canal, when I broke C5, I didn't have any neurological impairment. I had an obvious head injury and a concussion, but I didn't have any problems with gross motor movement.
Wow.
So they gave me the opportunity to either internally fixate it, so you can get rods or internal hardware put into your neck, or you can do external fixation, which is a halo. Okay. Essentially, it looks like a big horseshoe that's screwed into your skull. That horseshoe is bolted into a breastplate and a back plate to keep it in place. And so you actually, from your pelvis up along the entire spinal canal, it's fixated, immobile. Right. So you kind of walk around a bit like a robot. It's a little cumbersome,
right?
Especially doing gross anatomy and trying to lean over cadaver tables and sit in labs for long periods of time. So
my gosh,
wow!
The first semester was certainly first semester of med school was certainly interesting.
So the breaking of your cosmic egg happened when you did a dive into basically the ground. You hit the ground. Luckily, your neck is a tree trunk because you've been doing all sorts of athletic exercise and really built up your neck. So the damage wasn't so devastating. Well, it was devastating, but for most people, it's paraplegic devastating.
Yes.
So you came out at this place. You're type A personality, super go-getter, 4.0, everything's done perfect, going to medical school, and you're interested in emergency medicine, which, by the way, we talk about a bit because emergency medicine is so phenomenal, and I have so much respect for emergency. I mean, I'd be dead without emergency. Right. I'd be really dead. I'd be both dead.
Both of us, Kevin.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes. Probably all three of us, right?
Probably all three of us.
Right. Yeah. We'd all be very, very dead.
That's right.
So I really love this idea of breaking your cosmic egg. When a scenario happens where you're, Rachel Raymond says this so beautifully, and I'm going to paraphrase, but she says something like, when you're standing on the edge of life, looking over the vastness of it, so many things that used to matter don't matter anymore. And those things that still do matter a great deal more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very well said.
Love it.
Yeah. It's one of those crystallizing moments that gets us really clear with what our priorities are and where we desire to focus our energy in this relatively short, one precious life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Beautiful. So tell me more about the cracking of your cosmic egg.
Yeah, there's a traditional practice. So another area of research for me is in psychedelic medical research, and I lived in the Amazon River Basin studying with the medicines there that expand states of consciousness. Because psychiatry is oriented towards the mind, neurology is oriented towards the brain and the nervous system itself.
Yes.
And there's a lot of overlap between the two. Like, where does the brain and the mind meet? And how do expanded experiences in the mind also lead to expanded experiences and accelerating healing in the nervous system? So I wanted to understand it from kind of both perspectives. And there's a practice in some of the traditional cultures where, upon being recognized and as an apprentice, so to speak, on the medicine path, there is a clubbing. There's literally a clubbing on the top of the head, on the crown, that opens up the cosmic egg, so to speak. And that term is specific to an author who's written a lot on transcendental biology named Joseph Chilton Pearce. And the cracking of the cosmic egg is essentially releasing what we thought we knew, and opening up to what now can be perceived with fresh eyes. How I can see the world differently, how I can see myself in the world differently, how I can release my programming and
Oh, we're losing you, Dr. Engle. We lost him.
Okay, I'm back.
Oh, he's back.
It keeps doing that. So to essentially be able to see now life fresh, and to come into that state of the beginner's mind again, that child's mind, the curiosity now to what's available. So the cracking of the cosmic egg, essentially kind of like in the Avatar movie, where the chief's wife, or the kind of the medicine woman of the tribe, she asks the hero, where is your cup at? I.e., it's hard to fill a cup that's already full. And he's like, oh, yeah, well, my cup's empty, i.e., I'm ready to receive. Yeah. So cracking the cosmic egg is essentially like opening the cup back up to be ready to receive now the medicine that we're most aligned and can most effectively use.
I have so many comments that I'd like to come forth with. So first of all, it's so amazing. Just I'd like to remind ourselves and our listeners that we're speaking with an MD, and how often we hear these ideas of spirituality and plant medicine and cracking of cosmic egg and finding purpose and reevaluating life, and setting your priorities. It's a beautiful thing to hear all of this.
Yes.
I also really connected with what you were saying with the child's mind. In fact, I talk about, after my brain injury, it was as if I was redeveloping, going from a completely dependent state where I was reliant on others to take care of me entirely, to going through my terrible twos where I'm like throwing tantrums and whatnot, to like my teenage rebellion phase, and all of these phases, seeing the world and redeveloping in this way, but backing up to recognizing life and love and getting your priorities of what life is truly about is so powerful.
And then some of us have to do it twice because we didn't get it the first time. After my first TBI, a brain tumor, I was so angry and I wanted to get back to where I was. And Kevin, I always reflect upon your experiences and how humility came to you so quickly. And for me, it took a second brain injury from a strep infection and a little encephalitis thrown in to really command my attention. And then as the two of you discuss, finding, finding that cup, being ready to receive. And yes, I do thank the experience of adult onset pandas for that, but it took me 2 years before that humility, before I was able to approach that humility and say, okay, this is what we've got. And this is why I'm so ensconced with Dr. Engle's work, because he's developed through the full spectrum medicine. I'm sure, Dr. Engle, from your personal experience, but these 5 phases of development, and crisis is such a big piece. And so many of us stay in crisis for way too long. Can you speak to that and that turning point for change?
Certainly. Yeah, the 5 phases that you're referring to are akin to different entry points into the healing process. So the way I conceptualize it under this umbrella of full spectrum medicine is that it's an evolving path from the needed stabilization of acute care management up towards the peak, so to speak, of transcendence. And it's also reflective of what Kevin and you were speaking about earlier in regards to the importance of acute care medical management. Like the arena where Western medicine and allopathic medicine really shines is in acute care stabilization, triage care, operating room procedures, emergency medical care, etc. We're really good on the battlefield. And oftentimes, if we're looking through the lens of traumatic brain injury, that's the crisis that brings people into the healing process, and the acute care management on ground level 1 is necessary. And then once we have stabilized the situation, we've arrested the progression of the out of balance, inflammatory load, acute injury phase, then we can move up into the second phase, which is the healing arts. And the healing arts look at the wide variety of disciplines, medical disciplines from a variety of different traditions, all of which have a truthful lens at which they see healing. And that could be naturopathic care, chiropractic care, Ayurvedic care, Chinese medicine, allopathic medical care as well, because the medicines, pharmaceuticals do have a place.
Yes.
As well as traditional medicines and some of the traditional cultures that use herbal-based medicines and dietary approaches and cleansing and detoxification, etc. So the second tier is artfully being able to assess which medical interventions are complementary to one another and how to use them in concert with one another to accelerate the most efficient, effective healing on that trajectory, moving up from acute care management in towards the third phase, one step up, which is peak performance. So we move from the healing modalities into the third phase of peak performance. And at that point, it feels like, we're starting to find our stride. We're hitting peak performance in areas of personal, physical performance. That could also be cognitive performance, emotional development, relational styles, success in business, etc. And most of the clients that I work with, they get a sense that once they hit that third phase, that they have kind of reached the pinnacle. Because in our society, we tend to externalize the sense of success based on performance measures. So if you are successful in your business and you have X amount of money, or you have X kind of house and Y kind of car and Z kind of partner and all of these checks on the list,
the 2.2 kids. Yes.
Exactly. Then we should be quote unquote successful.
Yes.
But ultimately that can become relatively shallow unless we're really experiencing that deep soul-centered connection with our ultimate purpose, with that peak sense of fulfillment.
Yes.
And so to move into that phase, then we start looking at the transcendent experiences, or the mystical experiences, or those states of expanded consciousness where we see that my success is actually also dependent on everybody's. So it becomes dependent on everybody's ability to be fed, nourished, loved, celebrated. When we experience our greatest authentic truth, our greatest service back to the collective, we really feel like we're being used in a good way for the benefit of all. That's ultimately our greatest experience of fulfillment. And frequently it's challenging to understand fully what that looks like until we've had the ability to separate from all the old programs that said we needed to do X, Y, and Z in order to be valid, loved, recognized, honored, used well.
Yes.
But oftentimes those external goals are what leaves us shallow and with a sense of more. So moving from that third phase into the fourth phase, when we go into the mystical realms, we go into the transcendented experience, and we have an exalted state of consciousness, we have the opportunity to bring that experience back and utilize that in our lives to be even more fulfilled and purposeful than we thought possible. And then from that fourth phase, we go into the fifth phase, which is maintenance and staying more and more connected to that sense of oneness, divinity, pure creativity, joyful, authentic expression, etc. So that's kind of like the 5 phases of full spectrum medicine in a nutshell.
This is beautiful. It is so good to get to know the vastness of who you are, and what you bring from like this, from the acute stage to healing to healing spiritually, and then going beyond into peak performance, and again what you said with the measurements, the success measurements that we have, and how they can be shallow at times. Additionally, they can also be subjective, depending on what people think what people think is success versus what is viewed as success in our culture.
Yes.
Totally.
But I want to bring us back to the brain injury. So what brought you to write the Concussion Repair Manual?
Great question. After I had my last pretty bad concussion, which was not when I broke my neck. This one came a few years later.
I was just going to ask.
Yeah, I've had about 6 pretty sizable ones that were noticeable. And then I had, years and years of chronic low-grade concussions and TBIs, just getting bonked around, mostly playing soccer, but also on my skateboard, snowboard, and doing a variety of different combat sports. The last one, however, was snowboarding. Got turned upside down in a park. My goggles had frosted over, and I hit head first into this third kicker, and put an 8-inch crack in the back of my helmet. And at that point, there was this really clear voice, unlike any I had heard before, so to speak, was that you just crossed the line.
Oh, wow.
And it really was noticeable a few days and weeks and months later as I started having trouble with attention, focus, concentration, mood dysregulation, sleep. It's actually hypersomnolence as opposed to insomnia.
What is hypersomnolence?
Hypersomnolence?
Yeah.
I was actually diagnosed with narcolepsy, which is a form of hypersomnolence where you do a multi-sleep latency test, and you're in a sleep lab, and essentially if you can fall asleep within 5 minutes of laying your head on the pillow, and then you go into REM sleep within a couple of minutes after that, then it's evidence of what's called hypersomnolence and diagnosed as narcolepsy, and the treatment is stimulants.
Okay.
And that's either Ritalin or some other kind of prescription, like ADHD medications, which are pharmaceutically similar to methamphetamine and cocaine.
Oh, gosh.
And they work. The stimulants really turn your brain on, no doubt. But I also realized I didn't want to be hooked on a pharmaceutical. And so after taking that for about 3 to 4 years, but still having this post-concussive haze, I overhauled my diet, coming back to feed a brain and how to like actually nutrify the brain from the digestive system. Started overhauling my entire lifestyle and slowly started finding the traction. So I started delving deeper into the realm of neurocognitive restoration, a variety of different technologies, therapeutics, supplements, and started amassing over this last 12 years now all of the information that is now presented in the concussion repair manual, most of which was just me putting myself in the laboratory and seeing what was working. And after doing that for a period of time, and then gaining a variety of different clinical relationships with different centers and colleagues, eventually started to develop a niche in coaching athletes who were also healing from concussion and traumatic brain injury. Put those regimens into formalized protocols, put the protocols into a formalized book, and then launched the concussion repair manual, because I was essentially just sitting on all this information. And also, so there was that part, but the other part is it seemed like there was a gap in what was available. I'll be the first to say that there are a lot of people who know a lot more about brain healing neurologically and kind of neurochemically and neuroscientifically than I do. I'm not a research scientist by trade. I'm actually more of an experiential engineer, which means I want to put myself in the lab. I want to have an experience. I want to see what works, put that into a usable format. And so I suppose the most unique kind of position that I have is as an opportunity to be a bridge between those going through the experience of healing from their own traumatic brain injury and the scientific community that understands what methodologies and modalities work the best and why, and how we can use those in stackable, artful, and sophisticated ways to accelerate the healing. So I wanted to write a book that was both a textbook and a workbook, so that people could have the information written from the user's perspective. So it's not super complicated and hard to get through science, but it's all still there, well researched, well referenced. And so it's usable for clinicians who want to understand the complexities of traumatic brain injury recovery, but really to be able to write it at the level of advocates, friends and family, those going through the experience themselves, and to be able to track their symptoms over time, using these methodologies to understand what's working, what's not working, how to tweak the protocols. And I wanted to give the scientific understanding of TBI recovery in a workbook manual that has grit to it. It can be used in the lab with people going through the process of their own recovery.
Well, and it's so important to be able to track what is unfolding, so that, a week, a month later, someone, that patient, that person, can actually look back and realize from where they have come, because it's not always evident physically. But as you mentioned previously, the emotional capacity and our relationships, those are critical to our health and our healing. And so if we can't see that our gait is any stronger as we attempt to walk across the floor, but we were able to remain more grounded and have a better conversation with someone we love instead of being triggered into anger again, that's a tremendous accomplishment. And so being able to record that in a workbook format is really useful as we journey along. Which came first, please? The concussion repair manual or the 5 phases of full spectrum medicine?
I suppose I've been working on amassing the data and the information and the research for the concussion repair manual longer, because I had my last TBI when I was still in medical training, and so I was just starting to kind of gather all of this data. And then I experienced my first journey with plant medicine work and expanded states of consciousness about 10 years ago. And then these research arms started running in parallel. curious about brain recovery, curious about mind accelerated personal development and expanded states.
Okay.
And so in the expanded states arenas where I eventually saw full spectrum medicine with this blueprint, and then the 5 phases just got a bit more specific and teased apart from that.
Well, and I mean, specific, Kevin, the table of contents on the concussion repair manual, I mean, it just blows me away. Not just the discussion around healthy brains and injured brains, but then getting into primary technologies. I mean, you've put in so much information, so much detail, Dr. Engle. I mean, I have not spoken to one practitioner yet who has discussed water, light and oxygen, frequency. I mean, I am I'm thinking I'm way deep down that rabbit hole, and there I am flipping through the pages of your book and seeing flotation therapy, cold laser therapy, HBOT, which is the hyperbaric oxygen therapy, pulsed electromagnetic fields. I mean, that's my next research field, or not field, my next research project into a next step for my healing. And so let me tell you how thrilled I was to have this summarized in the table of contents. And this is going to be a phenomenal tool for patients, people, their families going through dealing with recovering from brain injuries.
Absolutely, yeah. And I'd like to speak into how you talk about the risks and benefits of each therapy. So that was absolutely how I steered my recovery, and how I still steer my recovery is I look at the risks and unknowns, because there's a lot we don't know, versus possible benefits, and weigh those. And I love how this is so set up, just like, hey, here's this therapy. Hey, here's what some of the risks are. Here's what we're not so sure about. And here's what you could possibly get from it, what you could potentially get from it. It's really beautiful. And you talked about, we, on our last podcast, we interviewed Dr. Nate Kaiser, and we spoke about the importance of anecdotal evidence, which is what you're talking about. You like going in there kind of N=1, where you're experiencing it yourself, and then taking it into practice and working with clients and developing protocols and seeing how they work. And I appreciate it so much. It's just amazing to see how this all comes together.
Yeah, thanks for that mirror. That was my goal in presenting the material, is that it could be something that was understandable, available, utilizable, and synergistic among the therapies. So, for example, chapter 1, if we're talking about primary therapies, this is essentially the building blocks of life. 5 main categories.
Yes.
Oxygen, water, light, nutrition, energy.
Yes.
And it just makes sense that we would start with the basics first. And each of those, because they have all been synergistic in promoting life on this planet, they're all synergistic technologies to be able to stack on each other. That doesn't mean that you can just go full on with each of them straight out the gate. There is some understanding about how to bring and layer technologies on top of one another in a sophisticated way that accelerates the positive potential and decreases the minimal risk or complication of having like a healing crisis. Sometimes more is not better. But when we're starting with primary therapies, these have highly available synergistic profiles. And to be able to then embed something like flotation therapy, which not everybody's going to do, not everybody's going to be drawn to, not everybody's going to have the desire and take out the time and the commitment to do that. But
can you explain what flotation is?
So when flotation therapy happens, we see one of the most effective tools for resetting the neuroendocrine system come online. And so flotation therapy is essentially lying in about 12 to 14 inches of hypertonic water. It's usually about 800 to 1,200 pounds of Epsom salts dissolved in water. So there's a buoyancy that is achieved. The salinity of the water keeps the body in this floating, resting potential. And so you're floating in this water with in an enclosed space. So some of the float tanks are small and maybe like 5 foot by 8 foot, but only a few feet high. So you can't stand up in. And then there's also float rooms that you can stand up in. And these are temperature regulated. There's no light. There's no sound, particularly once you put in earplugs and your head kind of rests underneath the surface of the water. There's no sense of gravity. So everything that our bodies has been, 80% of the sensory information from the environment is neutralized because there's no gravity, there's no sight, sound, temperature, etc. Proprioception relaxes. Everything starts to quiet so that the body can re-reference its internal state. And it's the most restful state. And it's actually the first time since we were conceived that we're without sensory experience.
And so I was just going to say, we're back to an embryonic state, artificial, but an embryonic state.
Right. And so all of our stimulation comes from within. At that place.
there's a dance between what we perceive from the external and how we language that, how we experience that in the internal, and usually that's from this database of memory that we have, and from the future projection of what that past memory means for the future. So we're constantly surveying the environment. We're constantly on the lookout. And then we could get into philosophical discussion about like what those subconscious drives are and the id and survivability once those primary needs are met. Like the Buddha says, there are things that we are drawn to out of pleasure. There's things that we are averse to out of pain. And we get pretty binary.
Right.
And the nervous system is set up that way. It's binary. It's sympathetic and parasympathetic.
Right.
And that means it's both fight or flight, like action, or rest and relaxation and healing. And what flotation therapy does is it resets the neuroendocrine system back to a parasympathetic tone.
Okay.
And so when TBI happens, the vagal nerve tone gets compromised. And the vagus nerve is the cranial nerve from the brain to the whole GI system. And when that's compromised, digestion is compromised. We don't assimilate the nutrients that we're taking in. So something like we can even be doing the best nutrient and supplement protocols, but if we're not assimilating and utilizing it, then we're getting only suboptimal benefit.
Absolutely.
That's right.
I love, Kevin, I love hearing this information coming from a psychiatrist.
Yeah. And this is essentially what we're doing with full spectrum medicine too. We're blueprinting the renaissance of the field of psychiatry. What does the entire field look like when we start to bring these new sophisticated assessment tools, technologies, therapeutics, supplements available to the masses?
Right.
How do we individualize people's protocols to have an awakening experience, heal the trauma, both neurologically, physically, as well as emotionally and mentally, heal that trauma, including the right use of plant medicines? Because the plant medicines right now are wrongly categorized in Schedule 1. And I won't get into that whole soapbox as to why in the mixed administration all of those got put into Schedule 1. That's for another podcast. But what we do know, when the medicines are used in a good way that facilitates recovery, we see phenomenal remission rates and cure rates in the areas that psychiatry is really weak at, which is like treatment-resistant depression, anxiety, TBI recovery, neurologic repair, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, addiction, end-of-life transition. The medicines are extraordinarily good in this chronic repair phase, where psychiatry is more of an acute care management, and its chronic care support is lousy.
And the body, we have to acknowledge the fact that the body is always trying to reach homeostasis. And so when we don't give it the support that it actually needs, and we're taking the pharmaceutical intervention just to manage symptoms, we're interrupting the potential that we have to return to a healthful state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's important to recognize, and I'll be the first to admit, for a while I bastardized modern day psychiatry and allopathic medical care. I went way on the other side of the spectrum because I had been trained so dogmatically in Western medicine being the only way.
Yes.
And we as Western allopaths were ridiculing chiropractors and naturopaths and Chinese medicine docs and anything that we couldn't prove reductionistically under the microscope.
Yes.
And then when I started studying with these alternative and complementary integrative practitioners and started mentoring with chiropractors and naturopaths, etc., I realized that these are extraordinarily sophisticated templates of healing and methodologies that have been around for centuries, and they have their place at the table. So I got really against allopathic medicine because of their blackballing the other field. So I went on the other side, and even to the point that when I got septic down living in the jungle, I had a blood infection and got septic and pretty sick. I wouldn't take antibiotics because I was so staunch, and I wanted to know, okay, 100 years ago, before antibiotics, what would I have done?
Yes.
And I was getting sicker and sicker and sicker, and finally I found colloidal silver and some other alternative practices, and was able to kick it. And now I'm more of in the middle way. And now I would probably take antibiotics because even the pharmaceuticals have their place. In acute care management, they have their place, particularly for things like out of control mania and psychosis in the bipolar and schizophrenic kind of spectrum. They have their place to stabilize symptoms that are out of control and dangerous. And again, once that's first level groundwork in full spectrum medicine, and then once we've done that, then we move into phase 2 in the healing arts. And oftentimes when we're using those healing arts, then we can start to transition the pharmaceuticals in an effective way.
Well, and excuse me, I didn't know what to do with it at the time, but I remember reading about that transition that you're talking about into the healing arts. I remember a story from an Aboriginal experience where one of their sons had been injured quite severely, and he was in hospital through emergency and then stabilized after some time. And the father, may have been the chief of the tribe, said, "Thank you. Now we will take him home and heal his spirit." And it as I said, I didn't know what to do with that, but it was critical for me to find a path where I could be more deeply in touch with what had happened, because I had been so shaken, first by the brain tumor, where my survival rate was 1%. My GCS was 3, the Glasgow Coma Scale. I was rock bottom, and then there were a few iatrogenic errors in eMERGE, which they happen. I remember coming back into consciousness, just fighting. I was ready to go, and I hadn't addressed what had gone on, nor had anyone else, when I was unconscious, but in an extremely traumatic event. I was dying, and there was a lot of commotion around that event. And so Kevin and I were actually exposed to the healing, the spiritual healing from the Cree Nation up here in Canada this summer, July. There was a Sundance ceremony which we attended, and it was incredible to see how the entire community, from children to chief, come together to work on not necessarily the physical healing, but the emotional connection and the mental and spiritual connection to bring about complete healing. It was beautiful. Beautiful.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, thinking of what you said earlier about taking these truthful lenses to look at health and healing, coming from so many different angles and different modalities, I suppose, in different cultures throughout the world. That there's so much truth in so many different facets, and integrating them. It's beautiful to hear you speak of this and to bring this new integrative idea to the forefront, or I don't know if it's new, but this integrated forefront, this integrated viewpoint of that there are tools out there and we can use them in different ways to heal from our ailments.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and Calvin, I mean, as we said at the very beginning of this podcast, there's not going to be enough time to discuss everything we want with this doctor. And I mean, just I really I'm excited for the release of the Concussion Repair Manual. Dr. Engle, I truly am, because there's so much I want to ask you about now, but we get into you get into the detail of the biologic nootropics, the fish oil and glutathione, vitamin C. But then I'm intrigued by chapter 4, Nature's Medicine, where you get into discussing sleep and sun, sex, sound, skin, this music therapy, earthing, heliotherapy. I mean, this is going to be such a gift to anyone who picks it up. And I think, like you were talking about, the consciousness, the collective. I mean, once, that 100th monkey, once the first 100 of us get a hold of this information, I hope that all of a sudden our consciousness and awareness just expands, and this becomes the new norm, to be putting nature's medicine to work for our healing, and looking deeply at our personal practices, our movement, and centering the mind. And when is the book coming out, please?
Mm-hmm. The launch is October 17th.
Oh, coming right up.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Very exciting.
And where can we find more information?
So for the book itself, the URL concussionrepairmanual.com is the easiest, most direct route.
Terrific.
And we'll eventually do with concussionrepairmanual.com, which some other platforms have done, and that's to bring thought leaders onto the field, have interviews and podcasts or discussion style platforms, to have as many people who are oriented towards a similar worldview and healing view come on to share their perspective. Because I'd love to have the opportunity to, again, essentially like sit around the council fire, and everybody who has some understanding of the healing potential that concussion and TBI offer, to be able to bring their voice forth as well, and build that informational platform, and ultimately help to build even more of a community platform, which is essentially what you guys are doing, and I'm super excited for that as well.
Oh,
So
save me a
Concussion Repair
seat.
Manual is the first URL, and then the other two URLs that we spoke about before are fullspectrummedicine.com and drdaningle.com.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful.
And I just want to say I'm very excited for the launch of this, and thank you so much for what you said about what we're doing. We would absolutely love to work in tandem with you, because clearly there's so much synergy going on between us.
Absolutely. Yes.
Clearly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well,
Thank you, Dr. Engle, so much for your time and sharing all of, your experiences, and then the years of work, this data you've been recording and keeping, and so diligently preparing for publication. Thank you so much for sharing this today.
Yeah, you're very welcome. It's been a pleasure to be on with you guys, and I imagine we'll have plenty to talk about should we desire to do number 2 in the future.
That is definitely on the roster.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Have
You
a
guys are
wonderful
welcome.
day.
All right. You too. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right, everyone. That is it for episode 29. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, that was fantastic. I am so. It feels so good to be interviewing. I mean, everybody we interview is fantastic, and I'm just so grateful for having this platform to bring this information into the world. And thank you, Michelle, for being a part of it.
Oh, Kevin, it's truly my pleasure. I never expected to be here in this co-host seat, and you've given me a challenge, and I'm ever so happy to be here. Yes, and
yeah.
I really, it's exciting every time we get a new booking, and I get to research who this time. And I really love the words of Dr. Engle, and his work, working towards recovery in the best way for each person. And I mean, that just honors each and every one of us as an individual, that N equals 1 formula. And there are so many modalities, and as we explore them, and as their availability becomes, well, first off, more well known, but the number of practitioners of other modalities, healing modalities in locations all around the world expands. I'm just so excited for the opportunities that people will have to take care of themselves.
Yes, absolutely. Andre Nakayama says true but partial when it comes to a lot of double blind placebo controlled research and these ideas that we really put so much so much weight into. It's like, yeah, absolutely, but it's not everything.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And you know who else says that is a lovely soul, Jessica Flanagan, clinical nutritionist, and so more and more people are speaking up, speaking out, and making their thoughts, their opinions, their work known. And the message is so similar. I'm very excited for what this brings. This is foreshadowing. I'm excited for the next chapter.
Speaking of chapter, you can get the first chapter of my new book. We just changed the opt-in.
You've launched it. Oh, that's terrific. So you can enter your email address and get the first chapter for free.
Yeah.
Well, so we got very generous of you here this September 2017, Kevin.
It's actually October.
Well, by the time this is launched, you're right. It's October.
Exactly.
We work in advance. Our secret is out.
We do.
We plan. People, our brains are capable of planning. This is a good mental exercise.
It really is. It really is. This is neuro rehab extraordinaire.
It's true. All right, Matt, let's let these listeners off onto their next adventure for the day, and let's sign off. Any housekeeping details to wrap with?
Again, if you would like to drop a buck or two in our tip jar, our web tip jar, head over to patreon.com/AIBI for Adventures in Brain Injury.
And if you would like to give us an in-kind donation, please jump over to iTunes or any of the other podcast download sites and drop a 5-star in our jar.
That's right. Doesn't cost a thing.
No, but we appreciate. We appreciate your support.
It helps us so much get heard by more people.
Yeah. Well, and you are an award-winning blog site, so clearly more than one person has done just that, a 5-star in the tip jar.
Well, thank you, Michelle. And if you would like to sponsor, we are looking for pre and post-roll sponsors for this podcast. Pre would be before the interview, and post would be right here, right now. So you can head over to feedabrain.com/sponsor and apply to be a sponsor.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for the consideration of sponsoring our podcasts.
And I think that's it. I think it's time to wrap.
I was just going to say exactly that. That's a wrap.
That's right.
Gluten-free.
All right. Till next time.
Till next time. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Someone take me to a doctor to take away this curse.